It's Mark chapter 9, starting at verse 30, and you'll find it on page 1013. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were, because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. Then they came to Capernaum, where when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all." He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me."
Do please keep your Bibles open, page 1013, 1013, Mark chapter 9, looking at verse 30. I wonder if you've ever had this experience. You're out with some people, perhaps you're in a really photogenic spot, there's a memory you want to capture, and you think, we should take a photo. And you look around for a smiling, trustworthy stranger, and you say, "Oh, would you mind if you..." And they come over to take the picture, and you smile and you pose, they snap away. They smile, you smile, they go, and it's only ages later, looking at your phone, you realise their thumb was over the lens. How annoying is that? Maybe more annoying is when you were trying to take a picture of something you wanted to make sure you could see again. Perhaps you can guess what famous archaeological site this person was trying to capture. No, you can't. You can't tell that it's the Parthenon because their thumb was over the lens. How annoying is that? When the thing you really want to see is obscured by you. There are things you miss when self gets in the way. That's really annoying when it happens on your camera. It's much worse when it happens in life. Quite often in life, it's possible for us to have our own thumb over the lens. I do that all the time. I walk away from a conversation cringing as I realize that I made that whole thing about me somehow. And if you've not been the one doing it, I'm sure you've been on the receiving end of it at some point, perhaps talking to me. It's horrible, isn't it? Thumb over the lens of life and all the things you miss. Here's what the philosopher and novelist Iris Murdoch, herself not a believer, put it. She put it like this: "We fail to see the big wide world at all because we are blinded by obsession, anxiety, envy, resentment, fear. We make a small personal world in which we remain enclosed." And that's happening here in Mark's gospel. That's what's going on. Something is being missed in what Jesus is saying. He is, in this section, clarifying his mission. But as clear as Jesus is making it, the disciples aren't getting it. Something means they are not seeing what he is showing them. Back at the end of chapter 8, the penny dropped for them that Jesus is the king. But in all of the verses since, there's been this terrible frustration. Because of something they're missing, they're not able to see what kind of king he is, what kind of kingdom he rules. Why is that? Are the disciples particularly stupid? That doesn't seem to be the point Mark is making here. Something else is going on for them. Something's keeping them from seeing it. And we see what it is in verse 34. Have a look. Jesus asked them that question, what were they arguing about? But they kept quiet, because on the way, they had argued about who was the greatest. They had their thumb over the lens of life. There they were, jockeying for status, trying to figure out where they were on the ladder, hopefully up there, hopefully looking down on you. They were doing the thing that everyone we see on reality TV shows, like The Apprentice, is always doing. They're looking out for number one. They're talking themselves up. Self is their priority. Here's the thing. When self is your priority, you miss out on seeing what you really need to see. And this evening, we're going to see two things that we miss when self is our priority. First, when self is our priority, we will miss the king's destination, death, so others live. Jesus, at this point, is teaching the disciples privately. This isn't him speaking to all of the crowds. He's trying to avoid the crowd so he can say this to his followers. Verse 30, they left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. He's gathering the royal retinue. They know he's the king, and he's telling them what the king has come to do. He's showing them where the royal road will lead. Verse 31, he said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days, he will rise. What is the king's destination? I wonder what they were thinking. A throne somewhere so everyone can see his power. Perhaps the temple so that he can go and clear away the clutter and get God's people worshipping the way they should. Perhaps a battlefield where he can kick out those who've oppressed God's people, conquer the conquerors. Is that going to be the king's destination? And Jesus says, no. His destination is to be betrayed, handed over, killed, and then 3 days later to rise again. That's the king's destination, towards the death that brings life. Life for him, life for others. And it's really interesting how Jesus puts it, if you look at verse 31. Not to make this like an English lesson at school, but you notice it's the passive voice. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. And you wonder, by whom? Who will do that? Who will hand him over? And there are two answers to that. There among them in the room is one who will, Judas, the betrayer. Human treachery is part of the equation when you look at Jesus' death, and he knows all about it. The Son of Man is going to be handed over. But it's not just human treachery. Who is it who will hand over the Son of Man? Zoom out, and you see even as treacherous humanity is at work, there's a little clue in the way Jesus is putting it. Not just, you're going to betray me. The Son of Man will be handed over because God has in motion a plan to save despite human treachery, even through this act of human treachery, to save through the king who dies so others will live. Jesus' death is not a surprise at all to him. He knows exactly what he's doing. That's the king's destination. And it shows us, if we have eyes to see it, if our thumb's not over the lens, that he really is the king. Because only in Jesus do we meet the one who is lordly enough to stoop, high enough to be humble. He does not have the fragile ego of our leaders in the world, leaders in the church. I don't want to make any statements on US politics here. But if you've been watching some of the debates recently, all the commentators have noticed Donald Trump could not resist taking the bait when Kamala Harris was making digs at his rallies that they weren't very good. Trump couldn't resist. He couldn't get on with the points he was supposed to make, completely sidetracked, completely unable to resist the call of ego, because he, like so many of us, is so desperately insecure, has so much at stake, has to show that he is number one. But there's none of that with Jesus. None of that defensiveness, none of that pettiness, none of that self-aggrandizement, because he really is the king. In fact, and I think this is really interesting, one theologian says this is how you know that with Jesus you're dealing with the real God and not an idol we've come up with. Because only the real God could act like this. He talks about how the God of the Bible is always marked out by condescension, stooping down to his people. We saw that beautifully this morning in Exodus chapter 3. And he writes this: what marks out God above all false gods is that they are not capable and ready for this condescension. In their otherworldliness and supernaturalness and otherness, the gods are a reflection of the human pride which will not unbend, which will not stoop to that which is beneath it. But the true God is not proud. In his high majesty, he is humble. See, Jesus is so powerful, so glorious, so royal, that it does not threaten him to step down and serve. He loses nothing by doing that. He has no fragile ego he has to defend. He is Lord, and Lord enough to stoop. And you really notice it in this passage because his disciples are not like that at all. There they are, playing top trumps against one another. There they are, jockeying for position to see who is number one. You can imagine some of the banter. Peter, James, and John went up the mountain with Jesus. You didn't get to. Oh, and when we came down, look at the mess you'd made. There they are, tearing strips off one another. Beneath it all, such insecurity, such fragile egos. And that's why verse 32, they don't say anything. Verse 32, they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. Of course they were. Because in a room where everyone is trying to look like the greatest, who on earth is going to admit they don't understand? Who on earth is going to admit they need help? When self is our priority, we miss the king's destination, death, so others live. What Jesus has come to do will make no sense to us. Second, when self is our priority, we will miss the kingdom's direction, down towards the last and the least. Verse 32, they didn't speak up because they didn't understand. Verse 34, they didn't speak up because they were ashamed. Imagine that awkward silence. Jesus saying, well, what were you speaking about? Sounded like an argument. No one wants to say. Because even in that moment, they know how trivial, how petty, how crass it is to be thinking like this. Especially when compared to Jesus. He really is the king. He is the one who could stand on ceremony. He is the one who could rightly claim number one place in life, in the world. But his destination is the cross. That's what he's come to do. It's shocking that they're so out of step with their master. And because they're so obsessed with status, because their thumb is so over their own lens, they are missing out entirely on what Jesus' kingdom is like. Verse 35. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. Jesus sits down. That's sort of taking up a teaching position, a rabbi among his disciples. He wants them to get this. His kingdom moves in a different direction. It's not the ladder where you know your place and you're always trying to go higher up. It's not like that. In Jesus' kingdom, the direction is downwards, down towards the last and the least. When we're with the disciples, jockeying for position, we're always asking, who serves us? In Jesus' kingdom, we're always asking, who can we serve? Because we know that that is where the glory is, according to Jesus. One thing that does is it completely shifts who the important people are. In every organization or group or whatever, there are always important people, aren't there? The important people who really matter. It matters what they see. It matters how you treat them. It really matters that you get it right around those people. I wonder if you think about maybe your workplace or groups you're part of, who are the important people? Might it be the stakeholders who need to be impressed at board meetings? Is it the donors whose gifts are the ones keeping everything afloat? Is it the inspector whose review is make or break for what happens in your classroom, hospital, restaurant, whatever? Who's the person you have to impress? Well, in Jesus' kingdom, there are important people too. Who are they? Have a look at verse 36. He took a little child, whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." Who are the important people in Jesus' kingdom? Precisely the people who are not important anywhere else. And that should make church one of the strangest places you ever come to. Because here there are people who come and bring exceptional gifts, come and contribute generous financial support, come with all sorts of assets, and yet, here in Jesus' kingdom, it is the least that he says are most important. They are the important ones. And how we treat them says everything about whether we as a community really do belong to Jesus. In his kingdom, the child who back then and now, I've got children, I can tell you this is true, the child who adds nothing in terms of finances and stability and all sorts of worldly goods, they are the ones who count in his sight. It matters how they are treated. Verse 37, please don't miss this. Jesus is saying how you treat them is a statement on whether you receive or reject me. And whether you receive or reject me is a statement on whether you receive or reject God. God is saying, I see my little ones in the kingdom, and how you treat them, I take personally. What you do for them is what you do for me. It's like if you ever read Harry Potter, a really wonderful scene. Hermione has been speaking about a house elf. They're sort of domestic servant creatures. And Ron, who's used to their work, is just, he's blasé about it, and he can't have Hermione going on about it. He says to her, Hermione, will you give it a rest with the elf? But Sirius shook his head and said, she's got the measure of Crouch better than you have, Ron. If you want to know what a man's like, take a good look at how he treats his inferiors, not his equals. It's a very searching point. You see it in life all the time. When self is our priority, we shore up our fragile ego by looking down on others. And we feel better when we have more people to look down on. And our position on the ladder seems more significant when we notice how many people are on rungs beneath us. That's how it normally works. But in Jesus' kingdom, the direction is different. It's downwards, towards the least, towards the last. They're the ones who count. We're not always trying to move up, pursuing the glory that comes from being number one. We're heading downwards as we follow Jesus. That's what the disciples were missing at this moment. They didn't understand the king's destination, why he came. Couldn't wrap their heads around his death so others live. And they didn't understand the kingdom's direction. It was entirely counterintuitive to move downwards towards the last and the least. And it's because they had the thumb over the lens. What about us? Could we have our own thumbs over our own lens? Could we be making the same mistake? The answer will come out in how we spend ourselves. How we spend ourselves. And I have a couple of questions to ask about them. Questions that, as I ask them of you, I realize I'm really asking them of myself too, because life feels so finite. I feel so finite. When people ask me to do things, these are the questions I'm always thinking about. What's worth my energy? I don't have as much of it as I'd like. What should I spend it on? Who's worth my time? Who should I pour myself out for? Will it be someone who can give anything back? These are the questions we ask. The answers we give, they'll be changed depending on whether we have come to Jesus' cross, recognized him as the king he really is, and are living in his kingdom. And it's important at this point to hear this, there are two angles on the cross of Jesus we really need. One of them is to know that on the cross, Jesus has fully paid for all our sins. It is finished. In that sense, Jesus dies so we don't have to die. Hallelujah. But along with that and following that, another angle we need that Jesus is showing us here. His death on the cross sets up the pattern for all who follow him. His death on the cross, it's not just the thing that saves us so we don't have to die, it's also the thing that shapes us so we know how to live. And for each one of us, the question is, will we live this way? Will we come to Jesus so that we can be saved by his death and then have our lives shaped by his cross? Let's think about those questions then. What is worth my energy? And the answer that comes from the cross is this: serving and not to be seen. I think in so many ways this humbles me. When I'm tired, that is the time I don't want to serve, don't want to go out of my way. And it shows that I'm holding on to myself rather than following Jesus and pouring myself out. What is worth your energy when you're tired? Serving and not to be seen. And when I say not to be seen, that's not because visible service is bad, but it's because if your heart is like mine, and if your thumb is over your own lens, then very often you can look like you're serving God, but you're really doing it for yourself and how you're seen. What's worth your energy? Serving and not to be seen. Second question, who is worth my time? Think about all the different people you could be involved with, but the answer that comes back from the cross is this: network with nobodies. Those are the people who are worth your time if you're following King Jesus. Danger of being familiar with different bits of the Bible is that we sometimes don't quite see what we're reading. This time a year ago, we were in Matthew 18. What does Jesus say there? You might have remembered, become like little children. He's not saying that here. He will say that in chapter 10 of Mark's Gospel. Here, it's not about that. It's about welcoming little children, how you treat them. And the point Jesus is making is network with these nobodies, the people from whom you get nothing back, the people in whom your investment does not return to you. Make those the people you spend your time with. Today, that will still include children. I suspect it will also include our elderly, people who don't have cultural capital, influence, and voice. In Jesus' kingdom, they'll be the people we look at and think, you are worth my time. What about you? What about me? Do you need to ask the Lord tonight to get the thumb off your lens, to cleanse your heart, to see things as you ought? Our next song is a wonderful encouragement to do that. And perhaps even as we sing it, to be asking the Lord to make it true for us, that we would believe that who we really are is who he says we are. We're about to come to the Lord's table where we see that Jesus is not above his own advice. Here he is networking with nobodies, inviting nobodies like you and me to be somebodies in his family and at his table. As the band come up and as the music begins, why don't we stand and sing?